On this episode of Narcissist Apocalypse, we talk with an abuse survivor named Selene, and Selene was married to a possessive abuser. It's a story of enmeshment, financial abuse, isolation, put downs, intimidation, and the difficult process of leaving. Welcome to Narcissist Apocalypse, everyone. I am Brandon Chadwick, and with me today we have Selene. How are you?
I'm well. Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here.
Well, thank you for being here. And if you want to be a guest like Selene is today, please do go to our website at narcissistapocalypse.com. Click on the guest form button, fill out the form, and we will go from there. And also at narcissistapocalypse.com, we do have a support group. And with our support group, you get Zoom meetings every Wednesday nights, Thursday afternoons, and Saturday nights. So join our support group today. And we also have a newsletter at our website where you get a free workbook from every new survivor story that comes out. So join our newsletter today, all at narcissistapocalypse.com. And for today's episode, we do have a content warning as we do discuss physical abuse in this episode. And today you're going to hear Selene's story. And eventually, Selene was living in a prison and did her best to break out. On more than one occasion, she tried, but she made it out eventually, and you'll be validated by her story today. So, a big thank you to Selene for being here once again. And now I'm going to get out of my way and your way. Selene, the floor is now yours.
It's one of those things where when you look back on your childhood, you always want to think of the fond memories. Macaroni and cheese and cartoons and little dinosaurs on the floor. Unfortunately, with my upbringing, around 8 years old, my life began to take a turn. I was in school one day and we were assigned to paint these flowers. And I thought that I had done a really good job. It was this beautiful acrylic paint rose made with pastel pink and white. And it was drying when all of a sudden the teacher comes over and she looks down at the flower and she looks at me and she kind of hesitated, but she picked up my painting and she said to me, "This is so beautiful. I want to take this and show it to the principal. And the principal has some friends that would love to see it as well." And so of course I was feeling on cloud nine, like, wow, I did a really good job. So I walk with her down the hallway and we go into the principal's office and my painting is there on the table. And he comes in, that we had a female and a male principal at the time. The male one came in and he said, "I had some friends that wanted to see your painting. You did so good. If you don't mind, I'll send them in soon." And so I just smiled and said yes. And it did feel awkward, of course, sitting in the principal's office. And I sat there, and these two people came in suits, and that started an entire year to a year and a half where I lived in foster care and ended up living with my uncle because my father had been accused of doing something to a cousin of mine. And this was a very jarring experience. It's something that I still grapple with today in regards to how sudden your whole life can change. So that stability and everything that you knew can just be ripped out from underneath you. And learning that at a really young age was something that, never leaves you, especially when you become a parent yourself. So around the time that I was 10 years old, I was able to go back home, and life did feel like it returned to normal. I was raised by my grandparents and my father, and My father was more on the spiritual side, whereas my grandparents were more on the religious side. And predominantly, my grandfather always visited the Methodist church that we had in town. But I also attended a Catholic church, and the whole town had a lot of Catholic residents. And I attended there because growing up, my father had his own business, and so did my grandparents. And I ended up being babysat by one of the neighbors, and they were a deeply Catholic family. And I grew to like that. It was very interesting. I liked the ritual and the community of it, but I also really loved what my grandfather attended as well. And so it was really neat to see contrast, which, for somebody like me, I grew to understand that there are so many different things within people that pull at them or inspire them. However, along with the inspiration comes shame. So there's different views of shame within different communities. It can be bearing your shoulders in a spaghetti strap shirt. It could be having a skirt that is at your knees. It could be reading Goosebump books instead of reading the Bible. And I tried to cope with that. And on top of all of this, my mother was absent. So when I had been born, the very first thing that I understand that she said was, get that crying thing away from me. And I spent the whole time in the little nursery, and I was never held. And then she had me for about a year, and then my father got custody of me. It was understood that I was going to be put up for adoption if he didn't want me. And so I have this early, these early building blocks of shame and being unwanted or being abandoned or what have you. And so all of those things I internalized a lot. And still to this day, find that relationship, the way that I internalize those things, is still prevalent. So fast forward to when I was around 18 and I attempted independence by following in my father's footsteps because he was in the US Air Force. So I went into boot camp, and I was there the duration that would have taken to be able to graduate, but I had medical stuff pop up. So the day that I would have graduated is the day I actually went home. And so that sense of failure, it threw me into kind of a free fall post enlistment. So from there, I ended up just having odd jobs and couch surfing. And during one of those jobs, which was in a tire chain warehouse, it was here that I ended up meeting my ex-husband. So here I was, like one of the only women in the warehouse, and he comes up and we're talking. I'm 19 at this time, and he was funny. He was funny, and he liked, camping and hiking. He ended up liking fishing as well, which was really cool because I come from a long line of rock hounders, and they like to fish and everything. So there was alignment there where it was like, okay, I can go camping with this person, and I can kind of fish as well, which is really cool. And I guess in a way, when you look at my past with my dad and my family, I was trying to get back to that place because I wasn't able to hang out with my parents anymore. I wasn't able to go fishing or camping with them. But here's this guy that likes to do all that stuff. So there was a sense of home there. Well, we ended up, for one of our first dates, we went camping. And we had a great time, and attachments began. And I didn't realize until later, because what he told me was that he was going through a divorce. So he wasn't living with his wife. They were going through a divorce. And then later on, I also found out that she was pregnant. And that was definitely jarring for me. But at the same time, it was one of those things where, okay, they're going through a divorce. And the way that he portrayed her was that she was very manipulative and abusive. So, of course, I felt really bad for him. And I, thought, oh my gosh, I can't believe that you're going through this. I can't believe that you're getting a divorce while your wife is pregnant and you guys are about to have your first child. I thought about the separation between my mother and I and how hard it is to grow up with, without one of your parents. So it really pulled on the heartstrings. And so it wasn't until later, I can't even remember how long we had been seeing each other, um, but I found out that I was pregnant. And when I found out that I was pregnant, that's when I found out that he had lied. He was not living with his mother, and a divorce had not been filed. And it was shocking. And I mean, my whole world just was crumbling around me, especially because at that point I didn't, have a career. I didn't have a stable place to live. And he decided to stay with me, and we moved in with his mom. The first day that I met her, she seemed accepting of me, but at the same time almost seemed a little distant. But she also said some things about his soon to be ex-wife that made it sound like that she was abusive, and it made it sound like she had tried to keep her, his mom away from him, and ruin their relationship. And so I was like, okay, wow, I'm so sorry, and I wouldn't do that. And I was, of course, without having a mom myself, I had hope that, okay, we're going to be one big happy family. And that was shattered pretty quick, especially because we had religious differences. So she had a background of being a Baptist. And at that time, through everything that I had went through, and living at different people's houses and submerging myself in different communities, I was very spiritual. I had gone to healing group for several years. I became a Reiki master. I was interested in reading tarot. And these were all things that deeply concerned his mother. So she began to worry about her son's soul and the soul of my unborn child, thinking that I was going to damn them because I was going against the Bible by doing energy healing and by reading tarot and all these things. And it just seemed to be out of left field. But then as time went on, this became worse and worse. The way she would corner me and ask me questions, the way she would pull out her Bible and start reading from it with me and then at me. And it was very clear as well that there was an emotional incest that was happening between herself and him, because they had a family history of his father leaving and divorcing the mom when he was around 18 years old. When this happened, her relationship to her son changed, and she really wanted to spend all of her time with him. I remember seeing her ask him for back rubs or to play with her hair or whatever. And it was very uncomfortable to witness. It was one of those things where it just gave you the ick when you saw it. And then I learned the term emotional incest, and it made sense because of the abandonment that she went through and her history and the way that she was behaving. But then, of course, thinking back to what she was talking about with the ex-wife and to keep her from him, it wasn't the ex-wife. This was a perception that his mother held. And this was going to be something that stayed no matter who he was with. And as these puzzle pieces began to fall into place, I really got scared. But at the same time, I also held out hope that maybe if I told him about it, if I brought it to light, then there would be an awareness. And then with awareness, there could be change. And then maybe we could even end up in therapy about it. He didn't want to accept it. There was a couple times where he was like, oh, you're right, I do see this or I do see that. And then he would get really upset with her and he would try to talk to her about it, but she always played the victim. During the first time that we lived with her, I saw her behavior become more desperate in wanting him to be with her. And so luckily we ended up moving out. And this is when I was pregnant with my first child. And I was lucky enough to live in our own apartment for a while, and I gave birth to my first child. And I would say it's about 3-4 years that we were living on our own, but he was never responsible with money. He had moved jobs, he had pulled out his retirement, and he had filed taxes, and we had $20,000 that we could have used to pay off a couple debts, put in a savings, invest in something, what have you, and he spent it in less than 6 months. He bought motorcycles and clothes and this and that, and I got literally a blanket. I got a throw blanket. And it was one of those things where I had asked him and I had told him, hey, there's different things that I need, from shampoo, soap, or I needed new socks or what have you. And he would always laugh at me and say, where's your money? But I had no money and I had no job because I was raising a toddler. And not just that, but he was unwilling to babysit for me, which the father shouldn't look at it as babysitting, but he did. And so I wasn't allowed to go out and get a job, so therefore I had no money. And he was set to pay all the bills, but yet wouldn't be responsible with the finances at all. And that continued. And another reason why he didn't want me to get a job is because he said that he didn't want me to leave him. He thought that I would meet somebody else and I would take our child and leave. Well, at this point, there were still times where I felt empathy with everything because I could see how his mom treated him and how hard it was to realize that your parent is that way, to have the emotional incest thrown at you, to have the manipulation thrown at you, and to not realize it. And then I felt guilty. I felt guilty for holding up a mirror. I felt I've hurt him inadvertently by showing him this. And I guess I was also in denial of how much he was exactly like his mom. And I was afraid. I was a young mother, so 20 years old, and had moved far away from the town that I grew up in. I was all on my own. And so between fear and love, or what I perceived as love, I tried to stick it out. And there were times where it was still okay, and then times where it was really scary. I didn't understand why he wouldn't buy something so basic for me. I didn't understand why he would get so angry or laugh at me and say, where's your money? And then as the baby grew, he started to become angry, more angry. And it was almost this anger towards the child. He didn't like the child crying. He didn't like the fact that, the child wanted to be held more by me than by him. And it was just, I was nursing and I was the mom and I was always with the baby. But he took it personal and would get angry and would just smoke until he was, tired enough to pass out. And so that's what he spent his nights doing. Was he came home from work and he'd get high and then pass out. And then he'd get really mad if we woke him up or if the baby cried or what have you. And if I tried to sleep in another room, he would also get angry.
Hi, everyone. If you've been listening to Narcissist Apocalypse for a long time, you probably know I haven't done host read ads in years. And that's because all I really have with you is trust. So as time has gone on, I become more careful about what I bring to the show, especially because survivors deserve care from people who understand trauma and aren't treating it like some side issue. That's why I wanted to tell you about Rebound Therapy. Rebound offers specialized virtual treatment for people ready to work through past trauma and reclaim their lives. What stood out to me is that their therapists are carefully vetted and trained in evidence-based treatment. They pair their clinical expertise with deep support from survivor advocates who have lived experience to support your healing process between sessions. It's covered by many major insurance plans like Aetna, many Blue Cross Blue Shield plans, and more. Head to hellorebound.com/NA to check your insurance or get matched with a therapist. I'll also put the link in the episode description. So at first here, as you told me, you start chalking up this early behavior that's going on with your husband as just him being a new father, being overwhelmed. But then you eventually start to see that whatever is going on with his mother is starting to run even deeper than you thought before, as well as your husband here is wanting you all to himself too. So tell us about this.
Well, as time went on and the oldest got older, we had this ebb and flow where things were really good sometimes and we could laugh and we'd plan things and we'd go out camping. But it was also one of those things where I remember coming home because, of course, his mother would watch the child. And I looked in the trash when we got home one time from a camping trip, and there was definitely not enough diapers changed. And the baby had um, diaper rash. And I had gotten on her for that. And I was like, the whole reason that the baby has diaper rash is because you didn't change the diapers enough. And, now there's this discomfort. And so you really need to pay better attention. And then I tried to see how many, bottles were fed and everything. And it was subtle at the point. It was just subtle. And maybe she was just older and absent-minded. I wasn't sure, because this grandchild of hers, she had been obsessed over, to the point where when I had given birth, she was crying, begging to take the baby home with her and telling me, oh, you need to rest, it's fine, I'll take the baby. And it's like, no, you're not going to take the baby. And so it was always really strange. Well, another time that we went out and came home, she literally left every dirty diaper piled on my kitchen table to be like, look how many times I changed their diaper. And it was shocking. So I got to the point where I told him, I'm like, I'm done. I'm sorry, but we're not, going out anymore and having her watch the child. Um, and that was something that really made him angry, because he wanted his time with me alone. And as time went on, I remember her saying that even when she babysat, that he would get really mad when a child was crying. So it became clear that he really didn't want to be a father, that he was very angry about having a child. But here again, things started to get a little better. And once she wasn't watching the child anymore, things calmed down because she wasn't around the baby so much. So then I didn't have to bring things up with him about her. So we established this baseline. And then I ended up finding out that I was pregnant again. And it seemed like maybe things would be better this time. My oldest would have a sibling, and now we had this better baseline, and we knew that, his mom wasn't somebody to watch the children, but we had been having the oldest just with ourselves for so long that it was like, okay, well, we'll just do this on our own. We don't need anybody's help or anybody to babysit or anything like that. And so I had the pregnancy, and I set up the baby's room, and I was so excited. I even had a baby shower, which I didn't have one the first time. And so then we ended up getting a note on our door of our apartment that they were not going to renew our lease. And this is because they were remodeling the apartment complex. And instead of trying to fight to find another place to live, he said we were moving in with his mother. And I cried for so long, because I was like, I can't go there while I'm pregnant. I cannot move back into that house with that woman. And he said, we don't have the money to have a first and last, and I can't keep paying rent. So I had no choice, and we packed up our stuff and we moved in 2 weeks before my due date. We move in, and he basically just throws our mattress on the floor, and we're all stuffed back into one bedroom. And the mother-in-law began to tell my oldest that this child was going to take her parents away from her. And every time I would do laundry, I didn't realize it till later, she was stealing clothes out of the dryer that belonged to my oldest kid. And basically what she was doing is she was kind of getting a stockpile, so that way when my oldest would wake up and toddle out of the bedroom, she could be like, "Good morning, let's get you dressed, let's have breakfast, let's do this, let's do that." And she really favored the oldest, and it looked like she was just trying to be a grandma that was taking care of a grandkid. But that's not what it was at all. There was a conditioning that was happening. She was trying to get the oldest to be attached to her, and she would say things to her that was, this child's going to take your parents away, and I'm here, and I'll never leave you, and just really inputting these wild ideas into her head, to the point where one day my oldest actually came up to me and hit me in the stomach, and I couldn't believe it. It was really, it was jarring, and I tried to talk to her about it, and I tried to tell him, this is what your mom is doing. And again, I just wasn't believed. He didn't want to deal with it. He just, told me that me and her needed to get it figured out. So I have the baby, and I come home, and it was a cesarean. And I come home, and I end up on the floor, on the mattress on the floor, and that's where I sleep with the baby. And as I'm laying there, still on the, medication that you have to have after surgery to maintain the pain, she comes into the bedroom, and she just starts ragging on me about how she had a cesarean, the scar was different, and she doesn't know why I'm acting the way that I am, that I need to get up and do things, and basically just getting on me for trying to recover, and telling me that I wasn't, basically that I was weak. And she also said that this was her house, and I had no right to privacy. She would unlock the door with a key that she had, even if I locked it. So I later ended up installing a latch lock. So finally, when I got to the point where I could navigate the house better, I ended up getting this wrap that I could put the baby in. So that way the baby was strapped to me, but I could still do things. And I started cleaning the house, because the house was awful. She was a hoarder. She didn't take out her trash. And I was horrified, and I did not want my children living in a house like that. So I did what I could to try to start cleaning up the entire house. And I almost ripped my cesarean scar open because I was doing way too much heavy lifting too soon. But I did end up getting the house spotless. It was beautiful. It smelled good. It was completely redone. And even the neighbors came over and complimented the house, and they were like, "Oh my gosh, you've done so well." And she took all the credit for it, never said I did it, never said I did anything. And then one day I came out to the kitchen, and I heard her telling my husband at the time that I had begged to live there. She was saying that we had this conversation where I had begged to live there, and that she doesn't understand why I get so upset and XYZ. And I was so angry, and I was holding a bagel, and the bagel had cream cheese on it. And I ended up taking a little scrape of the cream cheese, and I flicked it at her because I was just so mad. And I couldn't believe it. I was absolutely shocked because it actually landed right between her eyes. And she was so enraged that she actually got up from the table, and she tried to strangle me. And he had to come in between us, and he stopped her, and I had to run back to the back of the bedroom. And then she ends up calling 911 and saying that I assaulted her. So when I heard that, I stopped eating the bagel, and I just sat there waiting for the inevitable. So the cops come in, then they say, okay, what happened? And I was like, this woman is crazy. She is lying to my husband. She is, and I tried to explain all these different things. And I said, what she's going to ask you to do is take me to jail, but keep the children. That is what she wants to do. When you go back out there, that's exactly what she's going to ask for. I said, if you can look at the entertainment center, you shall see Exhibit A, including my little finger swipe of the cream cheese in it, and that is all that happened. They laughed, and they're like, okay, hold on. So they went out, they interviewed her, and they talked to her, and they came back, and they were like, yeah. So we told her that if we take you, then we're also taking the children to CPS, and that made her be like, no, 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 never mind. No, it's fine. So nothing ended up happening except for that. And that's when I left. I packed up the kids in the car and I lived out of my car and I lived in motels. And then I was able, with the help of a friend, I was able to secure my own apartment. And I'll never forget that, being homeless, to finally walk up those stairs and open the door to my own apartment. I mean, I'll always remember that for the rest of my life. It was a very profound moment. And there was even this like welcome home basket and everything on the counter. So we lived there. Unfortunately, my husband at the time did move back in because I had found out that I was pregnant again. And after being away like that and living on my own, he came to visit because he wanted to see the kids. And so when we found out that I was pregnant, and after everything that we had been through, and he had started to change again, and it was like, okay, we've been through all this trauma, we've been through these cycles. I mean, you're acting, you're crying, you're telling me how much you miss me, you're apologizing for everything that happened. And, oh my gosh, is this the breakthrough that we have been needing? So the pregnancy was fine, and I tried to give birth at home, but I ended up having another cesarean, and then disaster kind of struck after the baby was born because then his father ended up in the hospital and passed away. And again, that was really hard. So again, things were just they were kind of calm, but he still had those, what I just thought was a personality quirk or whatever from everything. It's easy to bury abuse when you're not being fully aware of it, and when you're thinking that, oh, it's because his father passed away, or we just had another baby, or we just had some kind of big life milestone that's happened.
So these things that you thought were quirks, which is actually abuse, what were these things that were happening?
It was one of those things where I couldn't even leave the house to hang out with my friend. He would get jealous over that. He'd blow up my phone the entire time I was out with her. Even if I was only out for an hour, it'd be 15 minutes and he'd start blowing up my phone, asking me where we are and how much longer it was going to be. And then I learned quickly that when I left the house, I had to wear baggy clothes, and then my friend would have a spare change of clothes for me. And then I would go into the baggy clothes before I came home, because if I wore anything normal, that was, whether it's form fitting or a V-neck or what have you, he immediately started to say that I was, a floozy pretty much, and was going to cheat on him, and that's why I was out of the house. And then he demeaned me as a mother and all these different things. But at the same time, when I was home, he was calling me frumpy and he was calling me fat, and it was hard. And as the children grew, he also was calling them different names for regular things. Like if they didn't know how to do something, it's because they were a child, but instead he would call them idiots or other words, and he had no patience at all. He had thrown a steel toe boot at my middle child. There was also a point where he had tried to jump off the patio in front of us all, because I was starting to fight back, where I was telling him, and when I say fight back, what I'm talking about is holding him accountable, reflecting on his behaviors, asking him, why is he doing this and why is he doing that? Because at that point, I was starting to become more aware of the behavior. I remember one day there was just this realization where it was like, holy cow, there's this cycle where he would be really nice because he was wanting intimacy. And then if I denied that, then he would become very angry and emotionally violent. And during those times, I remember scooping up all the kids, running into their bedroom, locking the door. We had a bunk bed, and I had built this fort around it with blankets. And we'd all curl up in the corner in the back, just hiding from him. And he would go get the tools, and he would literally, I felt like I was in The Shining. He would take the door off the hinges to get to us. It was screaming and saying awful things, and it was just awful. So on top of that behavior, there was just a complete total stop of buying anything for us. No toothpaste, no shampoo, no soap, no deodorant, no feminine products, no anything at all. He focused primarily on his food, his, yes, toilet paper for the house because it benefited him, but the primary was, alcohol and a lot of pot. And so things were starting to ramp up a lot at this point. And because he wasn't buying anything for us, my father had stepped in and he was buying those things, but also to make groceries last because we were on food stamps. And he would spend all of that by like the 12th of the month. And that's where I learned that there's this grandmother bread that only takes like 3 ingredients and it's super cheap, because he wouldn't buy bread and jam, the most basic things. So I religiously, I made 2 loaves of bread every other morning. And I also learned that, like soldiers out on the field, they would have coffee and they would have cornmeal, and they would take the cornmeal and they would heat up water. They'd put the hot water in the cornmeal, and that's kind of what they ate for as like an oatmeal breakfast. So that's what I was living off of, because I wanted that if there was anything really good in the house, then I gave that to the kids, and I was having more of your vintage, cooking and stuff. So as I was living this way and really started looking for more resources, I remember calling a abuse hotline. I remember texting an abuse hotline, and then you could also chat with them. And I was starting to tell them the dynamic and what was going on. And then they gave me some really valuable educational resources, papers that talked about, the cycles of abuse and different things like that, that really made me become more aware. And as I became more aware, I also got really scared because I thought, okay, it's definitely ramped up. How much worse can it get? So I realized how early our vows had been broken and how soon and how long he had begun to mirror my father's abusive words, from when I was young. But that was a long time ago. And the father that I had when I was much younger is not the father that I have today. And that's another reason why, too, that I believed so much that my ex-husband could change, because I've seen evolution happen. And when people realize how much choice that we actually do have, it can be transformative. And so I held out that hope for so long. But the amplification of the abuse, the financial abuse, the emotional abuse, and the abuse around intimacy, it was getting worse and worse, to the point where I was starting to become really scared. There was, on the final night, I told him that I spoke to an abuse crisis line person. I repeated some of the information that I had learned from the pamphlet and really honed in on his behavior and how it matched these things. This made him really angry. And I'll never forget, I was back in the back bedroom. I was getting the children to sleep. And all of a sudden, I hear the loudest thud, like bang. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, what happened? It scared me. And I run out. And he's laying on the floor, but it's one of those things where he's perfectly on the floor on this bed that he had made. So we hadn't slept in the same bed for years. I was co-sleeping with the kids. And so he ended up making a bed out on the floor because he didn't even want to be in our bedroom. And this thud was him falling down perfectly on this bed that he had made. And then he acted really strange, almost like he, I don't know, it's hard to describe. It's like bad acting. And I was like, what's wrong? And he said, oh, I don't know. I fainted. And I was like, okay, well, if you fainted, then we should probably call, an ambulance. And he's like, no, I can drive myself to the hospital. And I was like, if you're having a fainting issue, then that's really not advisable. And I really seriously think we should call somebody. And he's like, oh, no. And then he leaves. And I recognized this immediately because his mother had done similar things in regards to her hospital trips. There was multiple times where she was in the hospital where he specifically said, I think that this isn't real. And so he leaves and he's gone for about 10 minutes. And then he comes back and he parks in the apartment parking spot and he says, oh, I couldn't make it. And I called my mom. And so his mom comes over frantic in the middle of the night and she goes and parks her car next to him. And I was like, nope, I'm calling 911 then. So if it's this serious, then this is what we're going to do. So I call and I'm on the phone with the dispatcher. They send an ambulance, they check him out. And I told the woman what was going on. And she was able to talk to the ambulance. And they all told me that there wasn't anything wrong, that this was like maybe anxiety, but that was pretty much it. He comes in after I get off the phone and he tells me that he had had a heart attack and that he had had multiple heart attacks up to that point and that they had all started the year that we got married. And that right there really scared me because I was like, okay, this is this is like the crescendo. I don't want to see how much worse it can get. I told him I'm done. We're getting a divorce, don't come back. And to my surprise, he totally was fine with it. He got his stuff and he left. Now, I had actually had divorce papers that were filled out and ready to file several months prior, but I held on to them because when you're going through the mental emotional anguish, that push and pull in that cycle, it really makes you feel like you're insane, especially because when you try to talk to the person and the person says no, this didn't happen, or XYZ, or like he would come home and tell me how he would talk crap about me to his work buddies and how like he would describe what was said, which was completely different. So I was completely misrepresented. And it was scary. And it was like he just lived in this totally different world. But at the same time, the way he presented it to me, you really do start to question your own sanity. So I held on to these papers being like, is it me? Is it him? Is it whatever? And I had also started therapy on my own, individual therapy. I had asked him to do therapy with me. He refused. He told me that it was me that needed it. And I was assured by my therapist and again by the people at the crisis hotlines that know that this was something that I really needed to get out of, that there was a potential, danger of the escalation being much worse. So at the point that this happened, I was like, okay, I can do this. I'm gonna do this. And I'll never forget, it was later on that night after he had left. And I was watching this Peaky Blinders episode, and Thomas Shelby, the main character, he was like, yeah, our family had been so poor, and each month we got a stipend. So I went out and bought flour and lard, and that was, basically all that they could afford. But one day he took the money and he bought a coconut and a top hat. And of course, his mom, was really upset at him and was like, "What are you doing?" But he said, "It was in that moment that I decided that our family needed and deserved better than what we were living. That we weren't going to live that way anymore." And they did. There's another one of the famous quotes in there that I am always telling people is, Churchill said to Thomas, "From a tent to a boat to a mansion, that's something, huh?" And I took that and I internalized it, and I was like, okay, I have nothing. I don't have a dime to my name. I have no idea how I'm going to pay rent, but I'm just going to trust the universe and this is going to happen. So I ended up inviting him back over one day because he wanted to see the kids. And I told him that I was going to go see my friend. But what I had done is I got in the car with the divorce papers and I went to the courthouse and I filed for the divorce. And when I came back, I was shaking. And he had said something stupid. I can't remember what it was when we were standing in the kitchen after I got back. Something derogatory about how I was dressed and seeing my friend. And I had the copy of the divorce papers and I said, "No, actually, I just filed for divorce." And he was gobsmacked, absolutely shocked that I even had it in me. It was then and there that I realized how meek he thought that I was, how incapable he thought that I was. And I understand why he thought that, though, because there was a long period of time encountering all of this abuse in regards to even trying to leave the house, even with a friend, that, the way that I was dressed and being accused that I was going to end up cheating on him. And then he would take that anger out on the kids, that I had gotten to this point where I developed really severe agoraphobia. And it was hard for me. Like, I couldn't even take out the trash. Like, it was hard for me to even touch the front doorknob. So this was a huge shock to him that I had gotten to that point. I was finally going to be free. And the other attempts, they didn't work, like living in the motels and living in my car and all that kind of stuff. At that point, I still hadn't gotten all of the help that I really truly needed through therapy and through the information that the crisis lines can offer you. But I was finally free at that point. But even with having that freedom, there was so much fear because now I had no job history. I had no job history. I had no idea what I was going to do, how I was going to get a job, how it was going to work with the school hours and everything like that. And I knew for a fact that there's no way he was going to pay. And that was definitely a huge fear. So I represented myself in court, and our day in court came, and it was quite glorious because I've always been a student, a researcher, and I really made sure that with the help of some people that my papers were exactly the way that they needed to be. And he was ordered to give me the tax return, a portion of the tax return from that year. We split that, and then he was ordered to pay child support. And that child support was just enough to be able to cover being able to still live at that apartment. So he did have some parenting time, but it was every other weekend. And there was no real overnights because he was staying with his mom, but we didn't want the kids over there. So he would just come and visit them. And at first, he is just coming over to my apartment. He is visiting the kids. And it isn't until he gets his own place that they start to go over to see him. At the point, though, he was still, I didn't quite realize it at the time until he actually told me something later, that he was still wanting to be in a relationship with me. Even though the divorce and everything had happened, he still didn't really truly believe that I was going to make it. So he was still kind of holding out. So from there, I come over to his place. I help the kids decorate their room. I split all of their stuff. And they seemed to be okay. They wanted to go over there because this was a new place and it was 2 rooms and all that kind of thing. And of course, because the transition now was that he wasn't living there, now he could be the fun guy. And now he was wanting to really get them on his side. So they'd come over and he had video games and he had fun food and all these things, that did make them want to come back and all that stuff. However, things started to change a little bit because he started seeing somebody. But this new woman that he started to see, she was really kind and I actually really liked her. And she was always really nice to me. So he started to go over to her house more. But then I found out that there wasn't a room. They were all like sleeping in chairs or on the floor because it was like a 1-bedroom place and he and his girlfriend at the time would be there. Well, then they told me about how one day they had stayed over at the apartment and there really wasn't much food in the house, but there was like some bananas. And so they ate the bananas in the middle of the night because they were hungry. He wakes up, he sees that, he's pissed, and he's yelling at them, well, you guys already had your food. You ate the bananas. You don't need to be fed. And then got them nothing. And so they just starved for half the day until I showed up. And then, it was one of those things where I tried to talk to some people and they're like, well, the state, you really have to have something that is very concerning, and you have to have like actual evidence to be able to say, hey, no more parenting time, no more overnights. And you can't just not have your kids go over there because then you're in violation of the child support order or the parenting time. And I didn't want to be held in contempt or anything like that. So I started sending them over with food. I loaded up their backpacks. I made sure that they had stuff. So that way, in the event that there was no food in the house, each child had their own whole set of food along with clothes. And so time goes on and it's like this. I would say that it was like that for maybe 6 months, close to a year. And as he was with his girlfriend, I kind of, whenever she was around, things were okay. And so with her being as kind to me as she was, and the kids saying how much she liked her and all that kind of stuff, I thought, okay, maybe it'll be all right. And then one day, the kids tell me that he told the kids that him and the girlfriend had broke up. And the reason why they broke up was because the girlfriend had a longtime male friend and they had went out to dinner. But this was something that was not uncommon. He even hung out with both of them. He got so jealous that night that he got completely drunk and he peed the bed and proceeded to tell my children that story. And then that's why him and the girlfriend aren't together anymore. And I just couldn't believe that he would tell children that. So here he was single again for a little while, and I ended up having a medical problem. I had an asthma attack and I ended up in the hospital and we didn't know what was going to happen. And it was one of those things where the kids then did have to stay with him, but also his mom was there. And they would not bring the children to see me when I was in the hospital. And when I did get home, the kids were crying, telling me that they were making fun of me for being in the hospital and for having asthma. It's something that the kids still bring up to this day. And that was really hard. But then he ends up finding another girlfriend, and this girlfriend was just as bad as he was. She's also estranged from her kids, and she had started the abuse towards the middle child as well, yelling at her, blocking her on social media. They're still together. They're husband and wife now. And from what I understand, they have an anniversary around my middle child's birthday. And so this was one of the contributing factors on why my middle child pretty much gets ignored around her birthday, is because they celebrate their anniversary and just throw her to the wayside. But when he had first met this lady, my children told her, because at first they liked her because she was brand new. And they're like, please be careful. Our dad is abusive. And they tried to warn her about the things that he had done to me. And she looked at them and was like, that's not abuse. What are you talking about? And she just kind of downplayed what they had said. And they were really concerned. They were very concerned for her. And then, sure enough, that winter, they heard the girlfriend and my ex fighting. And they were fighting about money and stuff like that. And then they had also said that they had found out that she had left a couple times, which basically sounded exactly like the relationship. The relationship I had with him was repeating with a new person.
So your ex had found a new person, and eventually you do too, but your ex takes this as a sign to stop paying child support, and the kids have a tough time with this. So tell us about this.
My ex completely stopped paying child support. He hasn't paid a dime in over a year now. And the way that he looks at it is, well, you're with somebody. You are all his responsibility now, not my responsibility anymore. So not having that support, and it is difficult not just on me, but the kids also sit there and go, we don't understand why we're ignored or why he won't send us this when we can see that he's doing all these other great things, not to mention the fact that he had another child with this new woman, and they can see that they go out on trips and the birthday gifts and all this kind of stuff. But this pattern, again, if we go back to the very beginning of this story, the very first child that he had before I gave birth to my first child, he never stayed in his life. He just, had child support garnished out of his paycheck, but he never had a relationship with that kid. And he has also learned that with child support, if you're on a payroll, they'll deduct it. But if you get fired or quit your job, it can take 3 months until child support catches up and finds you again. And so the job that he has now is, I mean, as far as I knew, it was financially changing their life, and he's been working under the table this whole time. So it's a willful choice to just not care about your own children. So there's still a lot of things that affect me today. So even though I don't speak with him anymore, I watch the effects of his behaviors on my children still. So the abuse is still happening, and I'm still dealing with it just in a different way.
So, how are you coping with all of that on your own? And what has your healing process looked like here in the aftermath, even though this is, it's still going on?
So even with all of that stuff going on, I have had a profound transformation within all of this. So when I ended up getting the divorce and COVID hit, I was able to land a job right before, it was actually right before COVID. My best friend was the manager at a dental office. So I went there and I was basically an assistant to the office, and it was amazing. So here I finally had a car, I had this job, and I had told my friend that I really wish that our kids could be babysat by the same person while I was here at work. And she said, well, if you lived closer, we could also carpool. And I was like, oh, that would be so amazing. So I laughed and I said, universe juice. And I said universe juice because, it was very similar to that night that I decided, okay, I don't have any money. I don't have a dime to my name, but I'm just going to trust the universe and we're just going to go with it and, believe that it'll be okay. So I did that again that afternoon, and I pulled up Craigslist, and there was actually a listing for one of her next door neighbors' houses that was for rent. I couldn't believe it. And I was like, oh my gosh, we could be neighbors. Not only could we carpool and have our kids at the same babysitters, but we could be neighbors. So I called it up, and that house was mine in less than 24 hours, which was absolutely incredible. So I moved back to my hometown that I grew up in. I got to put the kids in the same school that I graduated from. And I had a career type job, which was amazing. And by doing that and having that independence, it was something that I was like, I'm never going to let go of this again. I can't believe that, that I ever did. But when a person thinks back on that and they go, gosh, how did I ever let that happen? Or when you start to realize how long the abuse took place or the level of the abuse, it's very easy to blame yourself and be like, oh, it's all my fault. Because I did that for a while, to where I sat there and I thought every bit of abuse that the kids suffered was my fault because I stayed as long as I did. But I wasn't aware. The person that you are now is not the person that you were then. And it's a whole process and that takes place, and it can be so covert that it's really hard to realize and understand that that's even happening to you. So it was amazing to be in my hometown and to have a car and to have a job. And I'll never forget, he had looked at me at one point and said, I never thought that you had it in you. He was absolutely shocked that I was able to move us back to the town that I grew up in. He was shocked that I gave them a place with a yard because they had never had that before. And one of the big moments was my middle child had actually had this assignment in school where they asked her to do a Chinese symbol. And so she chose strength. And they asked her why. And she said, because my mom saved us. And that was strong. So having such profound moments like that was huge. And unfortunately, though, COVID hit. Of course, the dental office, they all closed down, and ours was rather new, so ours closed. And the years, that COVID year was incredible because during the end of my marriage, I actually started a podcast. And that podcast, I loved doing it so much that I wanted to take it a step further. And that January of the COVID year, I launched a online digital broadcasting station. And that housed all the different podcasts from the community that I was in. I loved being able to create that network. And it was all paranormal related, and I looked at it as a really big platform of being able to help others heal who have traumatic experiences in regards to like the paranormal and the strange. So I decided I was going to dedicate myself to that path. So I was a podcaster, I was a radio network owner, and then I decided, well, I also want to be an author. And I just started writing a book, and I was like, if it's supposed to be published, it will be. So 6 months later, lo and behold, the opportunity came, and I was able to actually sign with a publishing company, and I had my first book published. So every step of the way, I realized that so many different things were possible, because for the longest time, I never thought that I would leave my house. I couldn't touch the doorknob, couldn't take out the trash. I never thought I'd go anywhere or be able to give the kids a yard or anything like that. But as I progressed a little bit and a little bit, it was like, oh wow, I'm leaving my house. I have my own house, and the kids have a yard. And since then, I have traveled to over half the United States. I've been out of the country. I'm a published author of multiple books, and now a public speaker as well, things that I never thought would have ever taken place. But it takes that just that one step forward here and another tiny step forward there. It's like writing the first two words on a page. Just, it takes decision. And then it takes a lot of faith, and perseverance. I heard there was a quote, and I will botch it, but it was something in regards to like any dream is possible. You just turn it into a goal. You just create action that goes along with it. And so therefore, anything that you dream up is really truly possible. It just takes, writing out the small steps that get you started.
And if you had any words of wisdom for everyone listening, what would they be?
So I would say that awareness is really a big key here. Being able to recognize patterns is definitely the first step towards freedom. That can be hard because, Where does the awareness start? I would say definitely lean into curiosity. If something doesn't sit well, if your intuition is saying, I'm not fully sure, then research it. Ask questions. Don't be afraid of the awareness. And then maintaining autonomy in small ways really matter towards survival, whether it's, you just have something that's yours. It could be even like, I'm going to have a bath with a candle every Tuesday, something that is yours, something that you can hold on to, or a book that you read, even if you have to read it over and over again, it's yours. Being able to really make sure that you have something that anchors you into yourself, and realizing that any kind of abuse that you incur is never your fault. Shame is really implanted by others' manipulation. They want you to feel guilty. They want you to feel like it's your fault. But really, truly, the way that people treat us is a reflection of themselves, and it has nothing to do with us. And that is so vital to remember, and never being afraid to ask for help and support from your friends and your family, because that can really help clarify the reality. Because if you don't reach out and you don't ask, it is very easy to fall into that spiral and that false belief system that you're crazy. And just remembering that healing is completely possible. You can reclaim your identity, your voice, and your boundaries. It can take a long time to heal that, but in the end, you will, as long as you just choose. And even if it's just putting one little toe forward, until you can finally put a foot forward, and then so yeah.
Well, Selene, I really want to thank you for being here with us today and sharing your story. Since birth, you have been in it. You've been dealing with some type of abuse or family issue throughout your whole entire life. And when dealing with this specific relationship, specifically at the beginning, you're not just dealing with your abuser, you're dealing with the abuser's enmeshed emotional incest abusive parent. And whatever was going on there, and your attempt to break free was like each level of you going and coming back was still a push forward. And I hope a lot of people hear that today, that of course people are going to go back. It doesn't mean you're a failure. It doesn't mean that there is shame attached to these things. Shame doesn't have to be attached to this. You might feel like there's shame attached to it for going back, but you're pushing forward. Each thing you're learning from, and you just pushed forward and, push forward and push forward, and you got to where you got. And then on top of that, when you get out, you're still dealing with this person, but a lot of people might not put themselves out there like you did, and you started to do something that you loved doing, and you put yourself out in the world, and then this thing came from it, you know and a lot of people out there are afraid to put themselves out in the world. And we're talking about someone here who you has agoraphobia and was afraid to go out in the world. And then you went out into that world in a big way. So today you just didn't validate people's experiences. You gave them a lot of hope for their own future, because someone who had those types of issues that were created through this relationship, and then to go and do what you did, is pretty remarkable. So a really big thank you for being here with us today and sharing your story, and not just sharing your past, but sharing your future as well.
Thank you so much. It's been an honor to be here with you and to try to tell my story. It's one of those things where there was so much to tell. There's definitely a lot that I know that I'll remember later, that I'll sit there and go, oh, I wish I would have said this, or I wish I would have said that. But that's the nature of these situations, that you can be out of it for years and still and be educated, but learn that, oh, well, this also was abuse, or, oh, I remember this happening, because our minds are so powerful in regards to hiding certain memories so that we can survive. And that can also be something really heavy that we deal with later on. But, again, it's been an honor. Healing is possible. And thank you so much for everything.
Well, thank you, Selene, for being our guest once again. And if you want to be a guest like Selene was today, please do go to our website at narcissistapocalypse.com. Click on the guest form button, fill out the form, and we will go from there. We also have a support group at our website where we have Zoom meetings every Wednesday nights, Thursday afternoons, and Saturday nights. So that is our support group. Join our support group today if you need help and you need support. And we also have a newsletter at our website where you get a free workbook for every new survivor story that comes out. So join our newsletter as well at narcissistapocalypse.com. And that is it for today's survivor story, for today's episode. So for myself and Selene, we hope you have a good night.